This is The Law Show on CL 650. Now back to the show.
You can go your own way.
Go your own way. Sure, if you can afford it. There's Fleetwood Mac music as we come back to The Law Show with Gordon Maynard and Rudy Kisher from Maynard, Kisher, Stojkovic, immigration and citizenship lawyers right here in Vancouver, downtown on Hamilton Street. We're talking refugees on this program with the very capable assistance of our studio guests. And Rudy, let's cut to the chase. And it's really handy that you have you've been personally involved, not only with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, but through your local church group on the North Shore. You have, in fact, sponsored refugees to Canada in the past. So now we know that groups, because the mayor had a thing in Vancouver a week or so ago, the premier's all over this, mayor of Toronto, mayor of Calgary, everybody's getting active on this file. So we've already learned from you two that any Canadian group, any group of 5 or more Canadians can gather together to sponsor a group. Typically, though, it's done through churches, as was the case with your church a few years ago. Tell us about the process and what, in September of 2015, these individuals or these groups are actually responsible for.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic program in Canada, really. I mean, we're one of the few countries. There's only about 9 or 10 countries that allow resettlement, really. And so what it says is if there's a will from people to actually do something, the government's going to help with this process, right?
Okay.
And so with our church, it was a Catholic group of Iraqi refugees that the Catholics that had left and fled to Turkey and were resettled out of Turkey. But the group, it was done through the church. So the church, there are about 70 groups that have agreements with the government, right? So they can
standing agreement.
They have a standing agreement in which they say they're going to step up with, and then the parish has to sort of submit a plan.
Sure.
It's about an 85-page document that you have to go through and say, okay, so when they come, where are they going to live? How are they? Who's going to help fund it? Have you got the money in place to fund it, right? Where are they going to go to school? Who's going to help them teach English? Is somebody of all, how are they going to get to doctor's appointments? They're not going to be able to drive. Who's going to drive them to those doctor's appointments?
And how long does any sponsoring group have? What kind of time frame commitment do you make?
You're looking for a 1-year commitment.
Okay.
So it's the year of their arrival. Usually you have to show that you have somewhere, depending on the size of the family, but let's say it's a family of 4, usually you have to meet what's called the low income cutoff rate, which is set by the government in terms of underneath that level, people will have struggles sort of surviving. So you're saying usually for a family of 4, let's say you have to show about $30,000. Right?
Oh, okay.
So it's a great process, and it was working a lot better before 2011. It's unfortunately it's a slow bureaucratic process, but it's gotten worse. In 2012, the Conservative government brought in this requirement that instead of the Canadian government making the decision whether somebody's a refugee, what happens is the group selects somebody, says we've heard of somebody, we know somebody, church overseas.
These are people in refugee camps. So
usually refugee camps.
These groups will be accepting resettling refugees.
It's only resettled. So people have to be, number one, outside of the country where they're fleeing from first, right? They have to be refugees. No, we didn't get much into this. A refugee has a well-founded fear of persecution on an enumerated basis. So it's not enough that you're fleeing the war in Iraq. Oh, life's horrible in Iraq. People are getting blown up all the time.
Right.
You have to show that you're targeted for a reason.
Right.
For some reason, you're suffering more persecution than the average Iraqi, because life is horrible in Iraq. So why are you suffering more? Well, if you're a religious minority or you're a standout figure, you've politically been outspoken, you might meet that definition, which is sometimes it's a very legalistic view. And I think one of the problems with it's not a sort of displaced person. You come from that area, we're going to resettle you.
Right.
It's a very legalistic. Are you suffering persecution on one of these enumerated grounds? Is it for your political opinion? Is it for your sexuality? Is it for your religious background? Is it because you're a minority group? Is it one of those rooms? So if we have those things in place, right? So you can imagine I get a call in the office. My brother's in Syria. I have to say, well, we can't help him. He's got to leave. So he flees Syria. He gets to Syria. Then can you help me now? Well, no. He has to actually then get accepted papers from the UNHCR.
Right.
That process, that wasn't there since before 2012. So you know what the backlog right now is? They tell me, okay, he's fled Syria. He's in Syria. He's going to go apply to get recognized as a refugee by UNHCR, which has a process where they interview. It's far less onerous than the Canadian process in terms of being time consuming, but there is a process where they got to be interviewed and a decision has to be made. The backlog is over 4 years.
Really?
So You're looking at a 5-year process.
So is it safe to say, given that 4-year time frame that Rudy's just identified, Gordon, that any person being brought into Canada by one of these sponsoring groups of 5 or church groups or whatever has been in some kind of refugee camp or facility for 4 years?
I think
quite likely.
Yeah.
Is that right? Wow.
Now, Anchor, that's the outside. I tell you, that's the worst. So, typically I would say when we were dealing before the Syrian crisis got worked with the Iraqi war, we were looking at about 3 years. But 3 years is a long time from a group of 5 people. Easier for a church group, a parish that's got sort of an organization.
Sure, there's an infrastructure there.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And there's, they meet every week, whatever it is. If you've got a group of 5 that wants to get together, how are you going to keep those people interested? If it's not a direct family member, you say, okay, we want to help somebody. Well, they're not coming here next year. We're not raising them. We're going to be 4 years out waiting. So you get together, you have the meeting, and then you sit and you wait. And you got to keep people interested. That's the challenge. And unfortunately, I think the government is unbelievably out of step, where you have people that are willing to do something, want to do something good. Government should be leading the way on this. Some people, and if they're not leading the way, they shouldn't be standing in the way.
Right.
Which is what we have right now.
I heard a figure today that says for this program, how many files are currently ready for assignment to Group of 5 for Syrians? The answer is 9.
There are 9 groups ready to go, and
9 files ready to go.
And so it's pretty safe to assume there are more than 9 groups of 5 or more Canadians anxious and ready to invite and welcome people from afar into the country. So the government isn't even able to accommodate the first wave of ready, open-armed Canadians.
The system is not responsive in terms of speed.
Okay.
It relies on a third party, the UNHCR, to make that determination. Why do we need that? We didn't have that before 2012. We didn't have it when we resettled the people from Bosnia, from Vietnam. We don't need it now.
Groups of 5 since 2012 can only apply for UN-designated refugees.
And if I'm a member of this group, I'm partner up with 4 friends, Gordon, and we decide we're going to...
You got no friends.
Well, I
Come
know
on.
that, but I'll invent a few colleagues.
I know you paid Dwayne, but
we decide we're going to sponsor a group, and now we understand that it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen for a good while. So in the preparation of our arrangement, our sponsorship arrangement, each of those people in that group of 5 is going to be responsible for a family, or at least an individual, for a year. So how much money do I need to put on the table, along with the other 4 people, to convince the government that we're good for what we're intending to do?
I believe it's $25,000.
So $5,000 each.
Yeah, it depends on the size of the family. So if you're sponsoring one person, it's less. It might be 60. But usually,
I see. Okay.
So
and you have to put this money up front, right?
You've got to show that it's available.
Legit.
You don't have to put it in an account. You've got to be able to show that you have access to those funds,
okay.
right? So you can prove it. Sort of income statements are a good way, tax filings, etc. Right? And you have to have met. These you have to make a certain amount of money to be included in this group to show it's not going to be a hardship on yourself.
We need to take a break, but answer me first one question, and this comes up all the time. Here we are focusing on people with papers. It's all terribly organized, and there's a stream going on, and that's our system. Many say the people in the most urgent need are the people who have nothing. They have no home. They have no papers. They have no idea of where they're going to be a week from now. And yet they are at the very back of the line. And the government will say, well, you clear out some people out of a camp and bring them to Canada. Those people who are wandering around with nothing can now take those places in the camp. But there are too many of them. So what about just filling up planes full of people who are just in dire, dire straits and flying them to Canada? What's the problem, Gordon?
Security and financial.
Okay. Just too high a risk in both categories, so finance and security?
There's risks on both. Look, when Canada resettles refugees, when they take those 12,000 a year, one of their selection criteria, and it's a very fundamental one, is whether or not that person can financially establish themselves.
No, I have to correct you. That used to be one of the requirements.
Okay.
They removed that more than 10 years ago, actually. That used to be that was removed, and it used to be that they used to put a requirement in there, which was a horrible thing because you want to help the people most in need.
Right.
So the ones that are most in need are the ones that are unlike are going to be least likely to be able to be successful here.
I wanted
and they've removed that requirement. That used to be there.
To put that question
Got that from the UNHCR.
to both of you, though, because this is a popularly held sentiment, and we sit there and we watch these,
from the Canadian
these
context. Sorry.
appalling pictures on the television news, and of course there's no shortage of it. Every night there are fresh reports from Hungary and Germany and all over that part of the world, and of course out of the Middle East. And so we see these desperate people. And so your heart goes out to them, and you want to just put them on a plane and bring them over here. But that's just not going to happen ever, is it?
Well, it might happen if the government decides. It's happened before. The government's been able to do it before. They did it in Bosnia. They did it for Vietnam. So they flew to Indonesia. They flew to Yugoslavia. They sent people to the camps, and they selected them. This process right now is for this circumstance, and this public outcry is not the solution. It's a great process,
right?
But right now, the Canadian people are saying they want more and they want it faster.
Okay, well, we're certainly hearing no shortage of comments from the Canadian people. And, of course, their political leaders, or those who would aspire to be their political leaders, have lots of comments as well. And we'll examine some of the spin going on around the refugee crisis when we continue on The Law Show here on CIL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CIL 650.